Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this third and last session of our webinar on voluntary sustainability claims on seafood products. For the past 2 days, we have focused on the theoretical context in which the sustainability labels were inscribed. We also had a practical analysis of the different impacts, advantages, and disadvantages of these labels by the various actors of the value chain. Today, we will focus on the ecological footprint of these labels as well as the consumer attitudes. We will then continue with a short presentation of 5 sustainability labels for seafood products. And in this panel will be moderated by Mr. Chris Davies, the former chair of the PECH committee. He will lead a discussion with the 5 panelists by asking them various questions on the issues, impacts, and developments of their respective labels. We will then finish the session with 2 presentations on animal welfare. Again, if you have any question to the panelists, please use the questions and answers chat button on the lower part of your screen and specify the name of the panelist you want to reach. He or she will answer you at the end of the panel. Regarding the busy schedule, I ask all the speakers to respect the time dedicated to them and not to exceed. As a moderator, I will especially take care of this. This will also allow participants to ask you questions at the end of each panel. Finally, I would like to thank again on behalf of the MAC, the European Commission, for letting us organize this workshop, and to thank all of you for being present today. This again shows to what extent sustainability is a key issue for the Europe of tomorrow. I also thank warmly our General Secretary, Pedro Rey Santos, for the organization of this workshop and his great job. Let's go directly to our first speaker, Dr. Sterenn Lucas, lecturer at the Agrocampus-Ouest SMART-LERECO unit, who will present us the consumer's attitudes. Doctor, you have the floor.
Sterenn, I think you need to turn on your microphone.
Is it better?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yes.
Sorry. Je vais continuer cette présentation en français. Donc, normalement, vous allez pouvoir voir ma présentation d'ici peu. Est-ce que ça fonctionne?
Oui.
Parfait. Donc, bonjour à tous. Donc, je m'appelle Sterenn Lucas. Je suis maître de conférence en économie à Agrocampus-Ouest, une école d'ingénieurs basée à Rennes. Alors, ce que je vais vous présenter aujourd'hui, c'est un petit aperçu rapide en fait de qu'est-ce qui va motiver un consommateur à consommer un produit de la mer durable. Donc, je vais parler d'allégations durables au sens très large du terme, puisque je vais prendre en compte tout le panel de certification qu'on peut avoir par rapport à la durabilité. Je ne vais pas faire de distinction dans ce contexte-là. Donc, qu'est-ce qu'on peut regarder en premier? En fait, le consommateur, il va toujours évoluer dans un marché donné. Donc, ce qu'il faut savoir, c'est dans quel marché évolue un consommateur. Si on regarde au niveau européen, le nombre de nouveaux produits lancés avec une allégation de durabilité, on remarque qu'on va avoir une différence en fonction des pays. Donc ici, ce sont des données qui sont extraites de la base de données GNPD Mintel, donc Global New Product Database, qui relève en fait sur un marché donné l'ensemble des nouveaux produits lancés sur ce marché. Ici, ce sont les produits de la mer uniquement, lancés sur différents marchés. Et en orange, qu'est-ce qu'on peut voir? C'est le nombre de produits lancés sur ce marché qui ont un claim de durabilité. Alors là, donc, claim de durabilité, j'entends, on a pris au sens très large, donc la durabilité sur la ressource en tant que telle, mais également les produits de la mer qui sont labellisés agriculture biologique, que ça soit sur le produit ou bien sur un ingrédient qui va rentrer en compte dans la composition du produit. On a également les dimensions neutres en carbone, qu'on retrouve très peu, ce sont quelques produits sur le marché européen, c'est relativement faible. Le packaging durable et le bien-être animal. Donc ce sont ces 5 dimensions qu'on va retrouver derrière ce graphique. Et qu'est-ce qu'on voit? On voit des marchés en fait comme le marché anglais, où on a quasiment la moitié des produits qui sont lancés sur ce marché aujourd'hui qui ont un claim durable. En France, on est à 40% à peu près, et on voit en Allemagne, on va aussi avoir une part importante. Et on a d'autres marchés où cette part est beaucoup plus faible, on va être autour de 10 à 20%, comme l'Espagne ou l'Italie, pour les gros marchés en termes de nombre de produits lancés. Qu'est-ce que ça nous dit? Ça nous dit quand même qu'on a des marchés sur lesquels le consommateur va chercher en fait ces notions de durabilité, même si ce n'est pas sur la ressource en tant que telle. Ce qui montre bien un positionnement, demande de la part des consommateurs. Sur tous les pays européens, on va trouver en fait une augmentation de cette part de produits avec un claim durable, mais avec des contenus hétérogènes. C'est pas sur tous les pays, on ne va pas avoir le même type de labels qui vont marcher. Donc on a des différences entre pays et des différences entre espèces. Ce qu'on peut repérer au niveau européen, par exemple, c'est que le marché va plutôt être tiré par le positionnement de durabilité sur le packaging et sur l'espèce, plus que par exemple sur le bien-être animal, qui est présent, mais qui n'est pas c'est pas le label Animal Welfare qui va porter en fait la dynamique du marché. On va retrouver des différences aussi entre pays, bien sûr, puisqu'on a vu des pays pour lesquels la moitié des nouveaux produits lancés sur les produits de la mer se positionnent sur au moins un aspect de durabilité, parce que bien sûr, les différents produits peuvent avoir plusieurs claims durables. Donc on a en fait des pays où ça va être très important, d'autres pays où ça va être moins important. On voit en général qu'en fait, on n'a pas de différence entre le marché global et le marché des produits de la mer. Ce qui signifie que si on a un pays sur lequel les consommateurs sont demandeurs d'allégations de durabilité, ça va l'être pour l'ensemble des produits. On n'a pas de spécificité par rapport aux produits de la mer. Un pays qui, en fait, où on a une acceptation globale de la durabilité sur le packaging va se retrouver aussi sur les produits de la mer. Un des éléments qu'on retrouve, du coup, c'est qu'en fait, on va avoir une dimension multiple en fait, de la dimension de durabilité. Elle se décline de plein de manières. Je pense que vous l'avez vu, je ne pouvais malheureusement pas être présente sur les sessions précédentes, mais on a beaucoup de choses derrière le claim de durabilité. Et que dans tous les cas, ce qu'il faut bien avoir en tête, c'est que l'utilisation en fait, de labellisation, quelle qu'elle soit sur le packaging, va mettre en compétition cette dimension avec toutes les autres dimensions qui rentrent dans les choix des consommateurs. Le consommateur, quand il fait un choix de produit, c'est en fonction de différents attributs. Et quand on met en avant la dimension de durabilité sur un produit, on met la notion de durabilité en compétition avec d'autres dimensions. Alors, si on regarde plus en précision, au niveau de qu'est-ce qui motive un consommateur à acheter un produit plus respectueux de l'environnement. Ce qu'il faut avoir en tête, c'est qu'en fait, les claims de durabilité en fait, sont là pour informer le consommateur sur l'impact environnemental du produit qu'ils achètent. Sans cette information, le consommateur ne pourra pas prendre en compte l'impact environnemental de son produit puisqu'il n'en aura pas conscience, il n'aura pas cette dimension-là dans sa prise de décision. C'est ce qu'on appelle en fait en économie un attribut de confiance, donc credence attribute, qui en fait, si l'entreprise ne signale pas cet attribut auprès du consommateur, le consommateur par lui-même ne pourra pas le vérifier. Le coût de recherche de l'information par rapport à cet attribut est supérieur aux bénéfices associés. Donc, l'ensemble des dimensions environnementales rentrent dans ce qu'on appelle cet attribut de confiance. Et j'en profite à ce moment-là pour bien souligner du coup la dimension fondamentale de la confiance dans ce type d'attribut. Si le consommateur a confiance, il va croire l'information et il va pouvoir la prendre en compte et être prêt à payer plus, comme on verra après. S'il n'y a pas cette dimension de confiance, le consommateur ne sera pas prêt à payer plus pour cette dimension. Donc on voit derrière l'enjeu de qui porte le label par rapport à ça. Et quel label, quel porteur de label amènerait le plus de confiance vis-à-vis du consommateur. J'ai dit également, en fait, le consommateur, il va faire face en fait, à de multiples informations. Quand il choisit un produit de la mer, le consommateur, il va le choisir en fonction en fait, de ses propres préférences, c'est-à-dire de ses caractéristiques socio-économiques, de ses préférences vis-à-vis des labels, de l'offre, bien sûr. Un consommateur peut avoir des préférences, mais si l'offre ne répond pas à ses préférences, il fera en fonction de ce qui est disponible sur le marché. Et en tous les cas, il y a divers attributs qui vont rentrer en compte dans ces choix. Donc on voit ici, on va s'intéresser aux dimensions de durabilité qui sont un élément important pour une partie des consommateurs. Mais on a bien sûr aussi les dimensions santé qui sont prépondérantes au niveau des produits de la mer. Et si on verra un peu après, ces dimensions en plus vont vraiment rentrer en interaction avec les dimensions de durabilité dans les choix des consommateurs. On a aussi les dimensions de praticité pour le consommateur, hein, la praticité de la consommation des produits de la mer est un élément fondamental. On considère souvent que les produits de la mer sont des produits compliqués à consommer en frais, et on voit un marché qui s'est vraiment adapté à ces dimensions-là en proposant de plus en plus des produits faciles d'utilisation, etc., pour faciliter l'acceptabilité du consommateur vis-à-vis des produits de la mer. On a les dimensions naturelles, donc là-dedans on met généralement sans OGM pour les produits animaux, qu'on ne met pas dans durabilité pour différentes questions, hein, parce que pour le consommateur on n'a pas un consensus par rapport à l'acceptabilité des OGM, donc généralement on met le sans OGM plutôt dans naturel que dans sustainabilité. Et puis bien sûr, comme je l'ai dit, hein, toutes les variabilités socio-démographiques qui vont influencer les préférences des consommateurs. Si on regarde plus spécifiquement au niveau des motivations pour acheter des produits plus respectueux de l'environnement de la part des consommateurs, on voit en général en fait qu'on va avoir deux dimensions fondamentales dans cette préférence. On va avoir tout d'abord bien sûr les préférences environnementales. Si j'ai un consommateur qui est sensible aux dimensions environnementales, il les prendra plus facilement en compte dans ses actes d'achat. Et on a aussi les dimensions de santé, puisqu'en général, les dimensions environnementales peuvent avoir un impact aussi sur les dimensions santé. Qu'est-ce qui va se passer derrière ces deux motivations-là? Ça va avoir un impact. Si je vais acheter des produits plus respectueux de l'environnement pour des questions environnementales ou pour des questions santé, je n'aurai pas forcément les mêmes préférences. Pourquoi? Parce qu'entre les deux, on va avoir un degré d'altruisme nécessaire différent. Si je prends en compte des dimensions environnementales qui ne m'impactent pas, par exemple, on peut dire que si un consommateur ne veut pas prendre en compte ne veut pas acheter de produits issus en fait d'une pêche non durable, on peut dire que en tant que consommateur individuellement, ça ne va pas l'impacter. Il ne ressent pas directement l'impact environnemental de cette surpêche. Donc du coup, pour la prendre en compte, cette surpêche, dans son choix de consommation au jour le jour, il va devoir faire preuve de ce qu'on appelle d'altruisme, de prendre en compte une dimension qui n'aura pas d'impact direct sur lui. À l'inverse, si on n'a pas en fait distinction entre l'impact environnemental et la consommation d'un produit, on n'aura pas forcément besoin d'altruisme parce que le consommateur subit directement la pollution liée à la consommation. Et on le voit sur les dimensions environnementales, quand on regarde un petit peu tous les travaux qui ont été faits sur par exemple l'utilisation d'antibiotiques dans l'aquaculture, où là en fait on a vraiment cette dimension de santé qui est liée directement à la consommation du produit. Là, dans ces cas-là, on n'a pas besoin du tout de degré d'altruisme nécessaire pour consommer des produits sans antibiotiques, qui généralement sont couplés à des pratiques environnementales. On voit directement ici en fait un lien fondamental qui est le lien entre environnement et santé et comment ces deux dimensions peuvent être corrélées au niveau du consommateur. Ce qui amène généralement le consommateur à devoir faire des arbitrages assez intenses entre les dimensions de durabilité et les dimensions de santé si elles sont séparées. Et on voit souvent, on a plusieurs papiers qui montrent ça, que quand on met le consommateur face à des allégations environnementales et face à des allégations santé, en fonction de ce degré d'altruisme, justement, les consommateurs peuvent préférer une consommation durable quand ils n'ont que le label durable face à eux. Et à partir du moment où on leur propose un label santé, en fait, ils vont se détourner du label de durabilité pour aller vers le label santé. Donc, il faut vraiment avoir bien en tête ces deux dimensions-là de qu'est-ce qui motive le consommateur à acheter des produits plus respectueux de l'environnement, parce que ça va jouer en fait après en fonction de l'offre que le consommateur va avoir face à lui, ça va jouer sur le succès ou non d'un produit. De manière générale, on considère en fait que le produit durable est plus cher à produire, ce qui va amener à un plus haut prix. En fait, généralement, on considère qu'il y a deux dimensions derrière. Il y a le fait qu'un produit plus respectueux de l'environnement soit plus cher à produire, donc un plus haut prix, et le fait que le prix en fait est en économie considéré comme un signal de durabilité, de qualité, et que du coup, pour le consommateur final, c'est important d'avoir un prix légèrement supérieur pour bien montrer la qualité environnementale du produit. Donc s'ils sont plus chers à produire, ou si en tous les cas on est obligé de mettre un prix plus cher pour signaler la qualité, il faut que le consommateur soit prêt à payer un petit peu plus pour ces dimensions de durabilité. Alors, il y a eu beaucoup d'études sur l'évaluation du consentement à payer, c'est pas évident. Il y a différentes méthodologies pour l'évaluer. On peut reprocher à certaines méthodologies d'être du déclaratif, où les consommateurs en fait annoncent un montant mais sans le payer réellement. Dans tous les cas, en fait, ça permet quand même de mettre en avant les préférences du consommateur. C'est-à-dire que même si on est en déclaratif, même si le consommateur au final il paiera pas tout ce qu'il a déclaré être prêt à payer, il montre quand même une préférence pour ce type de produit et une acceptabilité d'un prix plus cher. En tous les cas, on va remarquer que ce consentement à payer qui évolue, il va varier très largement entre différents attributs. Déjà, il va varier entre les pays. On l'a vu au tout début, on a des marchés différents en fonction de la préférence pour les produits plus respectueux de l'environnement. Donc on voit que ce consentement à payer plus pour des produits de la mer plus respectueux de l'environnement, généralement sont identiques à des pays où en fait on a une acceptabilité plus forte des produits biologiques, de l'ensemble en fait d'un positionnement durable sur les produits. Ça va varier aussi. Alors les pays, si vous voulez pour quelques exemples, les pays où on va retrouver les consentements à payer les plus élevés, généralement on les retrouve en Angleterre et en Allemagne. C'est les deux pays où on a des consentements à payer plus cher et c'est aussi les pays où on a vu où on a des parts de produits plus respectueux de l'environnement plus importants. On va aussi avoir des différences entre espèces, bien sûr, puisqu'en fait, chaque espèce n'a pas forcément le même prix. Donc, des espèces un peu plus chères ou des espèces un peu moins chères ne vont pas amener au même consentement à payer. De même qu'on a des espèces avec des caractères plus ou moins nobles qui vont, pareil, amener à des consentements à payer. Pour exemple, sur un marché français où on avait estimé un consentement à payer pour 3 espèces différentes qui étaient la sole, la baudroie et la Norwegian lobster, je ne me rappelle plus le mot en français, c'est bête. Sur ces 3 espèces, en fait, on avait des consentements à payer pour la langoustine, pardon, voilà, qui étaient de 15% à peu près, et qui étaient en fait que de 10% pour la sole et 5% pour la baudroie. Donc on voit Donc on voit vraiment des consentements à payer qui varient de 5 à 16%. De manière générale, les consentements à payer qu'on retrouve au niveau européen, on va dire, vont varier en fonction des espèces et en fonction des pays, entre 5 et 25%. Ça va être à peu près en moyenne les niveaux qu'on retrouve. Bien sûr, ça va dépendre aussi des attributs durables qu'on a derrière. Donc, il y a une étude de Sandler et Fudge qui a été faite dans le cadre du projet Success, où ils ont découpé en fait les différents attributs de durabilité entre animal welfare, pêche accessoire, durabilité en tant que telle, etc. Et on voit des différences en fonction de ces différents attributs. Le consommateur, généralement, par exemple, là où on retrouvait les consentements à payer les plus faibles, était pour l'absence de pêche, le zéro rejet, pardon. Donc c'était pour le zéro rejet qu'on retrouvait en fait les consentements à payer les plus faibles. Derrière cet exemple, on retrouve l'importance en fait d'informer le consommateur pour prendre en compte ces dimensions, encore une fois. Comme je l'ai dit, les dimensions durables, ce sont des dimensions d'information. Et donc quand on parle de durabilité au sens large du terme, ça parle au consommateur. Dès qu'on rentre sur des points plus précis, c'est très compliqué d'impliquer le consommateur par rapport à ces dimensions-là, de le faire payer plus si on ne l'informe pas en parallèle de qu'est-ce qu'il y a derrière exactement. Et puis bien sûr, on va retrouver des caractéristiques socio-économiques des consommateurs qui vont bien sûr rentrer en compte. Généralement, on va dire un petit peu l'archétype du consommateur de produits de la mer étiqueté durable. Ça va être plutôt une femme de milieu urbain avec catégorie socio-professionnelle supérieure et entre 40 et 55 ans. Donc c'est un peu l'archétype type d'une consommatrice de produits de la mer plus respectueux de l'environnement. Mais ce qu'il ne faut pas oublier, c'est qu'en fait, au-delà de cet attribut-là, bien sûr, ça va rentrer en compte avec tous les autres attributs du produit en tant que tel. C'est-à-dire, est-ce que mon produit, c'est un produit frais, un produit surgelé, un produit, etc. Toutes ces dimensions, bien sûr, influencent en fait les préférences des consommateurs vis-à-vis des produits de la mer et vont influencer le consentement à payer. Par exemple, généralement, on retrouve un consentement à payer pour les produits de la pêche et de l'aquaculture avec une allégation de durabilité plus forte sur les produits frais. Or, si on regarde le marché, en fait, on retrouve ces allégations plutôt sur les produits surgelés. C'est plus simple en termes de traçabilité, mais on voit bien ici, en fait, qu'on a une inadéquation entre les préférences des consommateurs qui sont prêts à payer plus pour des produits respectueux de l'environnement, mais qui sont plutôt consommateurs de produits de la pêche frais et qui ne vont pas sur les produits de la pêche congelée, et des produits, en fait, ces labels qui sont plutôt présents sur des produits de la pêche congelée, même si aujourd'hui, hein, ça évolue quand même dans le monde. Et puis bien sûr, ça va rentrer en compte, hein, comme je le dis avant, avec tous les autres attributs de confiance qui vont jouer sur les choix des consommateurs. Dans l'ensemble, en fait, sur tous les pays européens, on va trouver en fait au moins une catégorie de consommateurs qui a un consentement à payer positif pour les attributs environnementaux. Sur aucune étude, on retrouverait un pays européen pour lequel le consentement à payer serait nul. On a des pays pour lesquels le consentement à payer est plus faible. En tous les cas, il est toujours positif. Alors, qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire par rapport aux consommateurs pour essayer en fait de favoriser le développement de ces claims durables sur le marché européen de la pêche? Alors déjà, il faut essayer de lever les barrières à la consommation durable. On parlait de consentement à payer, un élément important, ça va être la contrainte budgétaire. On le retrouve dans toutes les études, c'est qu'on peut avoir des consommateurs qui préfèrent un produit plus respectueux de l'environnement, mais qui vont être contraints par leurs revenus. Le consommateur aujourd'hui, il évolue dans un milieu qui est très complexe, puisqu'en fait, on a une multiplication de l'information et une complexification de cette information-là. Je parlais tout à l'heure du zéro rejet, par exemple, c'est quelque chose que pour le consommateur lambda n'est pas du tout connu. Et donc, du coup, c'est des choses qui vont peut-être être difficiles à prendre en compte dans les aspects de durabilité au niveau de leur choix de tous les jours. Bien sûr, on a aussi les éléments de confiance vis-à-vis des organismes qui vont être en charge de la certification, qui va être un élément prépondérant dans le consentement à payer plus pour les consommateurs. Donc, il est important en fait d'essayer d'aider le consommateur à comprendre en fait les issues environnementales liées avec les produits de la pêche et de l'aquaculture de manière générale. Donc, c'est une information vis-à-vis du consommateur, mieux l'informer. Essayer d'avoir une simplification de l'information. Aujourd'hui, on a une multiplication des labels qui ne sont pas forcément les mêmes au niveau européen avec des labels nationaux. Donc, l'idée, ça serait de simplifier un peu cette information en ayant un seul et unique label européen. Et puis, bien sûr, aussi, essayer d'utiliser les nudges. Donc, les nudges, ce sont des outils d'incitation non culpabilisants pour les consommateurs qui ne sont pas basés sur des politiques de prix, mais qui sont basés sur l'étude des comportements pour essayer de favoriser des consentements plus respectueux de l'environnement sans être culpabilisants et sans être plus chers. Donc voilà, j'avais pas regardé l'heure, donc je ne sais pas si j'ai respecté le temps, s'il me reste du temps ou si, si je suis dans les temps. Merci.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Again, really interesting to have this facet of the issue. So yes, you are on time, as you are the only one on your panel. So it's Q&A till 35. So you have 5 minutes for questions. I see one question from Patrick Murphy. Dear Sterenn, thank you for your presentation. Would you have any research on how a certification was lost for an important stock did not adversely affect the retail price paid by the consumer?
Non, je ne vais pas avoir d'éléments là-dessus. Ce qu'il faut savoir, en fait, c'est que le consommateur, si on prend par exemple la certification MSC, le consommateur, quand on regarde la connaissance qu'il a de cette certification, elle est relativement faible au final. Et donc du coup, il n'a pas forcément connaissance de certains stocks qui seraient retirés de cette certification. Ce qu'il faut savoir, c'est que déjà, s'il est capable d'expliciter la certification, s'il entend parler en fait de certification, de retrait de la certification, il va remettre en cause tout le label en bloc. Donc c'est un peu ce que je pourrais dire, c'est qu'en fait généralement c'est sur l'acceptabilité d'une certification, s'il la connaît encore une fois, parce qu'on voit par exemple que dans les études de connaissance des labels, le label MSC, même en France, pour les études que je connais un peu plus, il est très peu connu en fait au final. Pourtant, il est présent sur de nombreux produits, mais quand on demande vraiment de l'expliciter, ou avoir des notoriétés non assistées. On demande de citer des labels, ça ressort pas du tout. Un des labels qui va ressortir le plus, en fait, c'est en France, par exemple, c'est PECH durable, qui est le label officiel français, qui pourtant est très peu développé, donc qui normalement ne devrait pas être connu du consommateur. C'est le nom là, c'est le nom qui fait penser à quelque chose de connu, donc les consommateurs déclarent le connaître alors qu'ils ne le connaissent pas. Donc ce que je dirais, c'est qu'en fait, si on a un événement en fait négatif sur une certification, on va plutôt avoir soit une méconnaissance de ça, et donc du coup ça ne changera rien du tout. Le consommateur continuera à consommer de certaines certifications. Soit on aura connaissance de cet élément négatif et on perdra la confiance qu'on accordait au label, et dans ce cas-là, on va rejeter l'ensemble des produits, même sur des stocks qui étaient très, très bien gérés.
Okay, thank you. So second question, brilliant presentation, Sterenn. Thank you so much. Could you reflect on how policy could promote the use of ecolabels?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Could you reflect on how policy could promote the use of ecolabels?
Ok. Je pense que ce qui est important en fait pour promouvoir les écolabels, c'est vraiment en fait de travailler en fait sur l'information du consommateur. Pour promouvoir les écolabels, il faut vraiment informer les consommateurs sur qu'est-ce qu'il y a derrière, pourquoi ils sont prêts à payer plus et quels sont les enjeux derrière. On a bien vu, hein, ce sont des attributs de confiance. Le consommateur lui-même ne pourra jamais vérifier la dimension environnementale derrière. Si j'achète un produit labellisé MSC, par exemple, ce n'est pas moi qui vais aller vérifier que toute la chaîne a respecté les critères. C'est je fais confiance en ce label où il me dit en fait que ces critères ont été respectés. Donc je pense que pour promouvoir l'utilisation des écolabels par les consommateurs, il faut vraiment renforcer leur connaissance des enjeux environnementaux globaux vis-à-vis des produits de la mer, pour qu'en fait cette dimension soit de plus en plus prise en compte dans leur acte quotidien. Après, je pense aussi en fait qu'il faut aller vers d'autres méthodes, comme ce que je disais, les nudges, qui sont en fait d'essayer de modifier les comportements des consommateurs pour consommer de manière plus durable, sans forcément chercher à avoir un consentement à payer plus cher, mais peut-être des habitudes de consommation qui changent.
Okay, thank you. We still have three questions. Costs. Economic challenges in the world. Do these labeled sustainable product risk being only niche products for those who can afford?
Alors, bien sûr, hein, tout à fait. Il y a cette dimension qu'à partir du moment où un produit est plus cher, on va ne pas permettre à certains de l'acheter. C'est ce que je disais à la fin. Une des barrières principales à l'achat de produits de la mer plus respectueux de l'environnement, ça va être le coût. On a vraiment cette contrainte de revenus qui est importante. On voit quand même que sur certains marchés, on a un développement très important. Je vois sur le marché anglais, par exemple, là, on a de plus en plus de produits où en fait la norme sur le marché, ça va être d'avoir que des produits plus respectueux de l'environnement. Après, est-ce qu'on ne supprime pas une partie de consommateurs qui consommaient des produits de la mer et qu'on ne consommerait plus? Ça, il faut essayer en fait de garder une politique de prix quand même, de pas se baser uniquement sur les catégories de produits des personnes qui auraient un consentement à payer très élevé, et de se baser sur eux en se disant on prend ce cluster-là qui sont les consommateurs qui sont prêts à payer le plus. Et donc du coup, on met un premium important, puis ces consommateurs-là consommeront, puis pas les autres. Je pense qu'il faut essayer quand même de modérer ça pour rester sur des produits de la mer de manière générale qui sont abordables, pour plein d'autres raisons que la durabilité, mais en termes de protéines animales, c'est un apport qui est important. Et de jouer sur d'autres motivations en fait, essayer de garder aussi d'autres méthodes de durabilité que le fait d'avoir un consentement à payer plus cher. De mettre des claims tout en maintenant un prix en fait pour permettre à l'ensemble des consommateurs d'accéder à des produits de la mer sains et respectueux de l'environnement. Donc ça peut être aussi des politiques publiques derrière de support de ces consommations.
Merci. Second question from Patrick Murphy. Thank you. Will the system where the consumer can access the information for themselves Could this be an improvement through peer code?
Alors, il y a eu des essais... Pardon?
I think it's QR code.
Oui, c'est le... Ouais, si je vois. Alors, ça peut être une solution. Alors, on voit que l'information au moment de l'achat va pas forcément être le moment de l'achat n'est pas forcément le meilleur moment pour donner de l'information. Parce qu'en fait, le consommateur, il faut savoir, il passe entre 10 et 15 secondes à choisir un produit dans un rayon. Donc, c'est un acte d'achat très rapide où, je suis pas rentrée là-dedans, hein, mais sur les habitudes précédentes ont une influence majeure. Par contre, ce que ça peut aider, c'est que ça permet d'avoir un accès plus facile à l'information après l'achat. Donc, si on a un QR code sur l'emballage, on va pouvoir regarder après achat. Mais par contre, faut pas oublier que ça va pas forcément être ça qui va permettre de provoquer l'achat en magasin, puisque en magasin, on va être sur des réflexes beaucoup plus rapides de choix. Mais ça peut donner de l'information une fois qu'on a déjà acheté le produit et permettre le réachat d'un produit plus respectueux de l'environnement et d'augmenter la sensibilisation par rapport aux thématiques environnementales.
Okay, and last question from Christine Apsil. Dear Sterenn, where was the research carried out? Supermarkets or also other locations such as fishmongers, markets or restaurants?
Alors, ça a été majoritairement la plupart des travaux que j'ai cités. C'est des travaux qui ont été faits pour la consommation à domicile en fait. Donc plutôt supermarket, fishmonger, markets, mais un peu moins restaurant. On considère que la restauration hors domicile, restaurant, cantine scolaire, c'est vrai que c'est un peu moins pris en compte dans ces enquêtes-là. On est vraiment plutôt sur la consommation à domicile. Mais bien sûr, il faudrait informer le consommateur sur la restauration aussi. Je sais qu'en France, par exemple, un tiers de la consommation de produits de la mer se fait hors domicile, dans des restaurations collectives où parfois, malheureusement, on n'a encore que poisson comme information. Et là, vraiment, il y a un travail important à faire. Déjà, avoir l'espèce, le lieu de pêche, avant de parler au-delà.
Okay, and so there is a last question. It will be the last one. It's interesting that you observe that in the eyes of the consumers, withdrawal suspension of a certificate puts the credibility of the certificate at risk, while we would believe that the fact that it can be an IS withdrawal if sustainability criteria are no longer met is in fact something that drives the trust of the consumers. In any case, all international credible benchmarks take this as a starting point. Can you comment on that?
Alors, si je comprends bien la question, alors je pense que ce que je disais, c'est pas forcément la suspension d'un certificat pour un moment donné, parce que si l'organisme de certification réagit par rapport à la non-durabilité, entre guillemets, de la pêche qu'il était en train de soutenir, pour le consommateur, ça peut être une réaction adéquate et on va continuer. Le plus dommageable, c'est si en fait la certification est critiquée par des organismes tierces et que l'organisme certificateur ne réagit pas. Où là, on remet en cause vraiment en fait la crédibilité de toutes les autres, parce qu'on se dit, si des organismes tierces ont un doute sur une certification, pourquoi est-ce qu'il n'y en aurait pas sur les autres? Par contre, bien sûr, si l'organisme réagit, là encore une fois, normalement, ça devrait aller dans le bon sens. Et donc, du coup, on dit que les autres pêcheries certifiées doivent respecter puisque l'organisme certificateur n'a pas réagi pour celle-ci. Donc, il réagit bien au moment donné et on a une bonne gestion. Mais encore une fois, là, on parle de consommateurs qui sont quand même bien avertis. La plupart des consommateurs n'ont pas du tout connaissance de ces cas-là. Sur la dernière étude que j'ai faite où on demandait est-ce que les gens connaissaient le label MSC, il faut savoir qu'on a eu à peine 30% de positifs par rapport à ça. Donc c'était sur une région en France, c'était assez spécifique, mais ça montre que c'est pas... Voilà, qu'il ne faut pas oublier le biais qu'on peut avoir des fois quand on est dans un milieu où on a une connaissance sur les produits de la pêche et de l'aquaculture, où on est dans un environnement où les gens connaissent la pêche et l'aquaculture, mais que dès qu'on s'extrait de cet environnement-là et qu'on va vers un consommateur lambda en supermarché, le niveau de connaissance n'est pas du tout le même. Et qu'il y a vraiment un gros travail là-dessus à faire sur l'information des consommateurs vis-à-vis des dimensions environnementales des produits de la pêche. Et qui est complexe puisque c'est pas la seule dimension environnementale sur laquelle le consommateur va être sensibilisé. Il va être sensibilisé sur l'impact de l'agriculture, sur l'impact de l'élevage, sur l'impact, etc. On a une multiplication et une complexité de l'information aujourd'hui qui fait que ça peut être compliqué pour le consommateur de s'y retrouver.
Thank you very much. Yeah, indeed, it's important to a little bit zoom out and to get out of this of the seafood sector and to figure out that it's not that easy for consumer and that they don't know all the information that we know and all the labels that we know. So thank you very much. We will
Welcome.
move to the next panelist, Mr. Henrik Stenwig, Director of Environment and Veterinary Affairs at the Norwegian Seafood Federation. Sir, you have the floor.
There, thank you. Try to give you the press. You can see the screen now?
Yes, but we see the comments and the next slides.
Okay. It's better now?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Thank you. And thank you for the invitation. I will give a short presentation of our work to develop a tool to function as an accounting system for environmental performance, and I'm also the coordinator of the project. In 2013, the Commission launched the Single Market for Green Products Initiative for Sustainable Production and Consumption. And the same year, they published the recommendation on the use of common methods to measure and communicate the life cycle environment performance of products and organization. And they proposed this as a common way of measuring environmental performance. This was brought further in the Green Deal document, where they focus on reliable, comparable, and verifiable information also plays an important part in enabling buyers to make more sustainable decisions and reduces the risk of greenwashing. The challenge here was well presented by Dr. Lucas. But the Commission's ambition is to develop rules making better information to the buyers, either consumers or to B2B in the B2B communication. This is an overview of the activities presented by the Commission, and it started in 2013 with the pilot phase, and we are now in the transition phase, where they were also developing the policy, as we know, and sometime in the future that we have the green arrow there with policy in place. They have not put any dates there, naturally. Sorry. We are now here. And then the development of the marine PEP CR for marine fish started in 2014 as a part of the second wave of PEPCR. Unfortunately, we have to discontinue in 2016, that we didn't manage to do this within the timeline of the pilot phase. In January last year, DG Envy and DG Grow issued a call for volunteers to develop the new PEPCRs, and in October last year, the project to develop a PEPCR for marine fish for human consumption was accepted by the Commission and is now one of the 5 projects to develop new so-called PEPCR in close cooperation supervision by the Commission. And you can find more information about that referred to in the slide. The members of the Technical Secretariat currently are the Norwegian Seafood Federation, FEAP, IPSEP, FEFAC, the Norwegian Fishermen's Association, and also Bellona, which is an environmental NGO situated in Oslo and Brussels. We hope also we could get more more interest from the catching part of the value chain into the technical, as member of the Technical Secretariat. We have currently 4 members, 4 companies as members, producing various products, salmon farming, wild catch, pelagic species, and so on. We hope also that we could get sea bass and sea bream producers on board. In addition, we have naturally an LCA consultant at Steinwig, which is a Norwegian industrial ecology specialist. In addition, we have Aquapef as observer. Aquapef is a project funded by the DG Research to promote the effective implementation of product environmental footprint in Mediterranean aquaculture sector, which means bass and bream mainly. And here we have the logos of the members of the technical secretariat. Our goal is to develop a consistent and harmonized set of rules to calculate the PEF for marine fish while engaging most actors and stakeholders as large extent. We have to develop this PEPCR according to the guidance, which is very detailed and comprehensive, but defines the requirements how to organize the works and also the process to developing the PEPCRs. And also the PEPCR should be developed in a format that persons with technical knowledge, that is LCA, as well as industrial knowledge can understand it and use it to produce, to conduct a PEP study of products. The scope, as it says, it's marine fish, which includes both farm fish as well as wild fish. We have the challenge is here that we have a scope that will cover all marine species. And there are many of them, about 2,000 globally, and it's a challenge to make a PEPCR that covers all, but it's better than we have a specific PEPCR for each groups of fish. It's not possible to compare products with different PEPCRs as the basis for calculating the environmental footprint. So the functional unit of our marine fish PEPCR is, of course, 1 kilo of fish, edible fish, including packaging, and it's the quality, how good the product should be appropriate for human consumption, and how long the products where durability of shelf life is established. These are qualities that is required to define according to the PEF rules. And this is a process. I shall not go into detail, but draw your attention to step 8 and step 14, which are public consultations of the drafts. So we hope that we get most stakeholders involved to comment our drafts. And the first will take place in the beginning, late spring next year, and the second in at about the end of 2021. Currently, we are at stage 5.7. And this is the boundaries of our PEPCR. Feed is, of course, important for farm fish, but during the pilot phase, the PEPCR for feed for animals food-producing animals was developed and approved. So the data needed for the feed used in aquaculture is calculated by the feed PEPCR. So the boundaries for our work includes the fishing, the catching of wild fish, also the farming of farm fish, of course, and that's where the two categories of fish differs. The rest of the value chain, preparation, distribution, and retail and consumption, are similar in in most aspects. What we do not include in the scope is the processing, smoking, salting, drying, marinating, and so on. These PECHs have to be developed based on the module of feed PECH as well. The PECH we have developed now for marine fish, which only includes preparing. That means cutting, chilling, and freezing. And this is a profile, the PECH profile of a representative product of farm fish. I will not go into detail. There are 14 impact areas, but draw your attention to the light blue part of the columns, which indicates the impact of feed in the footprints of farm fish. And this illustrates that when we have the ambition to reduce the footprints of farm fish, we should obviously focus on the feed. And by using the PECH for feed, we have it's very easy to see that most of the contributions of the impacts of, for example, climate of feed is coming from the use of vegetable raw materials in the fish feed. So we consider the PECH method as an important and useful tool to assess and document the environmental performance of seafood. The members of the Norwegian Seafood Federation experience increased demand for documentation of environmental performances from customers, from the consumers, as well as the financial institution and stock markets. The major challenge is that the accounting system for environmental performances is not standardized, and it's difficult to compare the various documentations and the reports. And last but not least, the PECH is considered as a useful tool to find the environmental hotspots in your own production, and thus how to prioritize the measures to improve the performance. And that's and we, as I said, there are 2 public consultations next year. We will invite all stakeholders to take part of that, and I will also draw your attention that we'll open a website with detailed information on the process, including invitation to the stakeholders to register. And this will be open in August, late August. And the website is referred there. So we will also send out an invitation to large numbers of possible stakeholders to inform about this website. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. We will be attentive to that consultation. So if people have questions to you, feel free to ask in the Q&A chat box. So another layer of information, poor consumers. How will the result of this work feed into labeling schemes such as example MSC?
This is really a focus for the Commission, and it was also focused during the pilot phase. But the consumer communication is not part of the work we are doing now. But I think the ambition, as referred to also with a quotation from the Green Deal document, is that the PECH, the results of the PECH calculations will be the basis for sustainability labeling or environmental labeling in the future. But it's really a complex area to inform the consumer. So as I said, we are not working on that now, but it's a major part of the policy making of by the Commission.
Yes. Is there any other question? No. Okay, so we will move to the next panel. So it will be a discussion between the five, so presentation and discussion between the five labels, and it will be moderated by Mr. Chris Davies. So you have the floor, Mr. Chris Davies.
Good morning. Hello. Yes, my name is Chris Davies. I'm the former chair of the European Parliament's Fisheries Committee and Environment Committee. And I must say, having listened to debates since 1999 in committees of the European Parliament, won't be the first time that the subject of eco-labels has come up, and whether or not the Commission should introduce a label of its own. Well, now, we've had a few technical difficulties, so I've not had the chance to talk to any of the panelists before we open this particular discussion. I hope over the next hour or so, we're going to be able to discuss with our panelists a number of different schemes which have already been introduced, some looking at particular issues of environmental sustainability and others looking at social factors. Now, first of all, I hope we have here Monique Tran talking from France about the eco-label PECH durable. Is that the case? Pedro, I'm looking to you because at the moment all I can see is myself and yourself.
Monique is here, and Monique, can you speak?
Merci. Merci beaucoup.
Ah, thank you.
Voilà, bonjour. Donc, je suis Monique Tran. Je suis donc déléguée filière pêche et aquaculture à France Agrimer. Donc, France Agrimer, c'est un établissement des produits de l'agriculture et de la mer. Donc, un opérateur d'État. On a 3 missions principales, donc éclairer les filières, organiser la concertation entre l'administration, les pouvoirs publics et les filières agricoles et les filières de la pêche et de l'aquaculture, et accompagner ces filières. C'est au titre de cette mission d'accompagnement que nous assurons le secrétariat de l'écolabel pêche durable en France. Donc l'écolabel, il est né avec le Grenelle de la mer, qui faisait suite au Grenelle de l'environnement, qui a été un grand moment de débat public, de débat entre l'ensemble des parties prenantes. Et cette idée d'écolabel, elle s'est, je dirais, consolidée, constituée au fur et à mesure. Elle a permis la mise en place d'une commission écolabel en 2012. Ensuite, la mise en place d'un référentiel, un premier référentiel en 2014. Et ensuite la mise en place d'un schéma de certification fin 2016. Donc on a je dirais un label, un écolabel pêche durable qui est relativement jeune, puisqu'il date de début 2017, et les premières pêcheries certifiées l'ont été qu'en juillet 2019. Donc vous voyez, c'est vraiment tout récent. C'est un label qui, de façon opérationnelle, a à peine un an d'existence. Donc il est encore en construction, mais malgré cela, il a une assez forte notoriété, comme vous l'avez remarqué lors de l'intervention d'Agrocampus-Ouest. C'est un label qui fonctionne bien auprès des consommateurs. Je pense que la recherche de durabilité au niveau des produits, elle est assez forte, et il y a une imprégnation culturelle, en tout cas du consommateur français, sur les signes de qualité qui est assez bonne. Ce qui fait que aujourd'hui, on est encore dans une phase où on essaie de faire progresser les pêcheries, les barilleurs, les transformateurs, la distribution, donc l'ensemble de la chaîne, pour que toute la filière, je dirais, s'approprie et mette en place l'écolabel pêche durable. Donc je vous rappelle, c'est un label qui est un label public. Donc c'est une dimension publique qui est très importante et qui a du coup fait que le label essaie de travailler sur les 3 dimensions, donc les dimensions environnementales bien sûr, mais aussi les dimensions sociales et économiques. Donc c'est un label qui a effectivement un certain nombre de prérequis au niveau de la certification, prérequis et de principes au niveau du respect de l'environnement, mais aussi des questions de rémunération des employés et puis de sécurité aussi des employés, ainsi que des conditions de rémunération tout au long de la filière. Pour avoir une rentabilité économique du produit. Donc, le label, il est décliné en un certain nombre de critères et le fait d'avoir cette ambition au niveau du label fait que la démarche n'est pas du tout évidente, mais l'idée, c'est vraiment de tirer l'ensemble, je dirais, de l'ensemble de la filière vers vers des objectifs les plus ambitieux possibles. Voilà un petit peu au niveau de l'écolabel, je dirais pêche durable, où est-ce qu'on en est aujourd'hui en France. Voilà. Donc après.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Can I just ask, where do you see the scheme going? I mean, how much recognition from consumers is there in? And it's very much a French scheme. Would you not say? Do you see it having wider European application? I'm not sure on this system, Monique, whether we're able to have a exchange of this kind. But are you able to hear me?
Alors.
Fine.
Oui. Oui, je vous entends. J'entends bien la question. Alors, l'écolabel, la dernière évaluation, je dirais, on a un baromètre d'image auprès des consommateurs. Le label, il est relativement connu par les consommateurs. Presque, je dirais, on a été assez étonnés, mais il y a, je dirais, plus de la moitié des consommateurs interrogés qui connaissent le label écolabel pêche durable. Je pense qu'ils n'associent pas forcément avec ce label l'intégralité de l'information ou l'intégralité des critères de certification. Par contre, comme c'est un label public et donc un label qui est porté par le ministère de l'Agriculture, il y a une certaine confiance du consommateur, même s'il n'y a pas une connaissance exhaustive de ce que revêt le label. Par contre, en termes de produits et en termes d'offres sur les étals, le label est quasiment, je dirais, est très très peu présent. Il y a 2 pêcheries aujourd'hui qui sont certifiées, une dizaine de marieurs. Donc, on est dans un processus où le consommateur n'a pas forcément accès aujourd'hui à des produits certifiés. Et c'est effectivement, pour le moment, le gros du travail, c'est d'arriver effectivement à développer la certification, la labellisation auprès de la filière, auprès des filières pêche et françaises. Donc, on est sur cette phase-là, 2020, voilà, de mise en place de la certification et de la certification des opérateurs sur le terrain. Donc, en essayant voilà, d'aller sur d'autres espèces, sachant que la contrainte quand même forte, c'est que on doit essayer de travailler avec, je dirais, des opérateurs qui prennent l'ensemble des dimensions en compte. Donc, à la fois des dimensions environnementales, avec beaucoup de travail et de collaboration, de concertation avec notre institut Ifremer, notamment pour avoir un maximum de dialogue sur la gestion des stocks, la gestion de la ressource, et puis un travail aussi en termes de pratique de pêche, notamment par rapport aux impacts sur l'environnement et aux impacts sur, je dirais, sur les milieux. Voilà.
Thanks, Monique. And you win the prize for the best backgrounds without any question at all. Thank you. Let me just turn to Helen Duggan now. Helen,
you can have my office if you want, but I think it's better host.
I think I don't know whether the in previous presentations whether there have been prizes awarded, but maybe we should all have been told beforehand that we had to have some suitable fish-related or water-related background in order to take part. Anyway, let me turn to Helen Duggan now. Helen, Head of Responsible Sourcing at Seafish, is that correct?
Not quite. It used to be. I've changed roles recently, but yeah, for all intents and purposes, my background is in responsible sourcing, and I've spent the last few years heading up our work with the team on the responsible fishing scheme. So I've prepared a few slides to share. Would you like me to just share them as part of my introduction now?
Yes, please do.
Okay.
If we can see those.
Excellent. There's literally only 4, so just bear with me. Can you see that?
We can.
Excellent. So firstly, thank you for inviting me to join you today. For those who don't know, Seafish is a non-departmental public body set up by the Fisheries Act in 1981. Our government sponsors are the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs and the Scottish, Welsh and Northern Irish devolved administrations. So using our unique non-competitive position, we work in partnership with businesses, government and organisations to overcome challenges and seize opportunities, tackling everything from research to campaigns, insights to training, essentially whatever we can do to support the UK industry to thrive. So in terms of the responsible fishing scheme, our work on responsible sourcing generally recognises the challenges the industry faces in sourcing sustainable seafood in an increasingly competitive marketplace, alongside continued public concern over practices that compromise human welfare and environment. The Responsible Fishing Scheme is a world-leading certification scheme developed to recognise vessels with high standards of crew welfare and responsible catching practices. It was essentially one of the first out of the blocks, if you like, of its nature. Back in 2014, it was clear to the UK seafood industry that there was a gap in end-to-end supply chain assurance schemes for wild capture seafood, and we were asked by the industry stakeholders we represent or we serve to redevelop the responsible fishing scheme. So by 2018, we had over 220 vessels certified from all UK sectors, and they contributed over 20% of the UK fleet's landings by value and over 30% by weight. So although it's a very young scheme, with industry support, we were quite successful very quickly. Now, we've always recognised as a non-departmental public body that we're not the appropriate home for a vessel-based certification scheme in the long term. So back in 2018, we also established an agreement to transition the programme to a new home with Global Seafood Assurances, and Melanie will tell you a little bit more about who GSA are in a moment. So for the last 2 years, we've worked in partnership with Global Seafood Assurances, or GSA, to develop the next iteration of the Responsible Fishing Scheme, and that's going to be called the Responsible Fishing Vessel Standard. So the RFVS has been developed using a robust, open and transparent standard development process, which incorporated input from all sectors of the global seafood industry. So over 30 organisations were very formally engaged with the governance structure, and many more contributing organisations beyond that. So some of the guys that you see there, these were the companies that we've worked with to oversee the process and input directly into the development of the standard. So that's why it's the end of an era, because the RFVS now replaces the Responsible Fishing Scheme. So applications to the RFS closed last year, and by the end of this year, any vessels wishing to engage with the scheme going forward will be transitioning over to the new standard. The certification scheme remains voluntary and vessel-based programme, which enables fishing operations to provide assurance of decent working conditions and operational best practice through independent third-party auditing. Now, at the moment, it's a business-to-business facing scheme, so we do not use the logo in consumer-facing marketplace, but obviously it'll be up to GSA going forward whether that might change in the future. This last slide just gives you an idea of the scope of the standard. So we have 2 core principles, and the key priority for the development process has been really to build on the experience of the UK market with the scheme to ensure that the next iteration is internationally applicable, credible, robust and practical. The next iteration of the standard has a greater focus on crew welfare than the previous, and it's also underpinned by the ILO Working Fishing Convention and other relevant ILO standards. So in transferring the RFS over to GSA, Seafish have essentially assured that the scheme will be managed by an organisation that has over 20 years experience in seafood assurance, and we're delighted to have transferred standard ownership to an organisation so that the RFS can become a global assurance model for vessels both in the UK and internationally. So thank you for the opportunity to share this quick update, which has hopefully set the scene for the discussion ahead. And I would leave it to Melanie to share in her introductory presentation how GSA plan to take RFVS forward as part of their best fisheries practice programme.
Okay, thank you very much, Helen. Just a question. Obviously, we've just had a French scheme and now we have a British scheme, although Melanie may explain how it might be taken further. And you've already explained that this is a scheme that's not addressed to consumers. It's really perhaps something the seafood companies and the retailers would expect. You know, pressure would be put on the retailers, for example, were there any instances of bad practice on board fishing boats, and say, why are you buying off these people? Why are you not buying off boats which have got the proper certification to demonstrate that good practices are taking place? That's how it's been. It's been very much based on business to business, if you like.
It's definitely been based on business to business, and I think what the development of the RFS recognised was that industry was looking for a practical mechanism through which they could recognise within the supply chain and support the companies committed to operating at best practice. And I think there's quite an important differentiation to make between legal compliance and best practice, and the RFS was about developing and recognising industry agreed best practice and then giving the supply chain a way through which they could essentially support the vessels, and those vessels recognised could be recognised for operating to best practice. So it's very much business to business supply chain assurance and part of that wider toolkit.
And would businesses been coming to you, especially the skippers or the owners of the larger fleets, of the larger vessels, would they be coming to you because the retailers were wanting these assurances? I mean, why would people not want? Why would people, especially from around the UK, why would people not want to bother with your certification?
And I think it's about, for Seafish, it was about supporting industry in this mechanism becoming available for then the market to adopt as would be appropriate to their businesses. So it's definitely the market pull is from the retailers, the big brand owners, those who need a practical assurance mechanism to be able to differentiate between the vessels and the owners who are operating at best practice and support that. There's different standards of operation, and for us as Seafish, as long as seafood is legally compliant, that's absolutely okay. And the certification schemes are about recognising best practice and just supporting industry and moving forward and continually improving the standard of operations.
Thank you. Melanie, can we turn to you? Melanie Siggs, the Director of Strategic Engagements with Global Aquaculture Alliance, and well, you can explain yourself. But
hi, Chris.
Please, over to you, Melanie.
Chris, thank you very much. Can you hear me? I
can. Yeah, I think we can all.
My screen here, and hopefully just add a little bit of kind of sense making to Helen's story, because I recognise that it's quite complicated when you transfer schemes and so forth. So what hopefully I can do with this is, in the very brief time that I have, is to explain how these things fit together. And what I have to do is work out how to share the right part of my screen. You know, these things always take very slightly longer than you ever hope they're going to do. So I'm just going to keep talking a little bit. I'm quite good at that bit. There we go. So hopefully you can now see this screen. So already there are 4 logos on there, and there are quite a lot of different number of propositions. And so what I'm going to try and do in a very short space of time is sort of explain how this family works. There is an organisation called the Global Aquaculture Alliance, obviously dealing in aquaculture and farmed seafood. And that organisation has been operating for some 20 years. And it owns a suite of standards called Best Aquaculture Practice. I'm going to tell a little bit more about this story in a moment, but we recognised a few years ago that actually there were a number of gaps in the assurance of wild caught seafood. And so that was our opportunity to start working with Seafish and to pick up the great work that they'd done already on a vessel standard. We created the organisation Global Seafood Assurance to do this work within, and the Responsible Fishing Vessel Standard is the first standard that we have created to fill one of those gaps. So that's how these organisations work together. Global Seafood Assurance and GAA are cousins, and GSA is drawing upon the 20+ years of experience of presenting global standards within the seafood sector. So a little bit more detail on those, and you can see how the structures look quite similar. So you've got a very mature structure within the Global Aquaculture Alliance, where you have a standards organization in BAP, and beneath that you can see the suite of standards that sit within BAP. And what's very important about that is to notice how comprehensive they are through the whole of the supply chain, right from hatchery, through feed and feed mills, through farming, through to the processing plant, underpinned by that chain of custody. And then another area to work in, which does our pre-competitive work. So it's work that looks at the challenges of aquaculture. So let's say disease or feed or sharing education or leadership or outreach or all those different kind of things. We cluster those under that pre-competitive space. And GAA is a non-profit organization. It's registered in the US, but to your point about whether things are UK or US or any other nationality, we consider ourselves to be global. So on the right-hand side, you'll see how we've sought to mirror that in a wild capture sector. So we are in the process of developing best fishery practice. And at this precise moment, what we've looked at is the need to fill some gaps. And the two that stood out to us were very much about vessel standards and in particular crew welfare. And I think the stories, the atrocities indeed of that have been well documented by both NGOs and the press of bad crew welfare, for want of an expression, they've been in the public domain and in the in our kind of sector domain for quite some time now. Sometimes those are difficult to relate to. We feel that we don't have a fingerprint on that and maybe we can't touch that. But some of them are much closer to home, and we have seen examples of those breaches both within Europe and within fisheries, which arguably touch on our supply chains, given that we have the world's biggest seafood market. I can say that either from a US or a European perspective. And secondly, I think increasingly it isn't appropriate just to certify for environmental best management. We must look after, you know, the vessels and the crews that are also working within those fisheries. So hence we have RFVS that was launched in May. I'll freely admit that we have some challenges around COVID right now about actually completing the next steps in our transition, which is around training auditors and getting on board vessels. But that's happening all over the world, and we're working rigorously to address those issues and feel very positive about that. And we have a number of pilots set up that are being, in fact, we probably have demand for more pilots that we can even service between now and the end of the year. And they will take place around the world in major tuna fisheries, in the Philippines, in Norway, in the UK, hopefully in South America as well. So we feel very enthused by people's response to this vessel standard, which is underpinned by these global conventions such as 188 that Helen mentioned. And I think that's very relevant because my understanding is that the appropriate EU directive says that EU countries will work to 188. And so perhaps, you know, there's also an opportunity to use standards like this to support compliance, which effectively monitored can often be an expensive national liability, if you like, financial liability. So the other piece that we noticed was that there was no unique seafood processing plant standard. We had one on the aquaculture side, so through full transparency and public consultation, we spent some time adapting that so that it's now available for wild capture fisheries, and it is the only, I understand that it is the only unique seafood processing plant standard in the world. So GSA also registered as a non-profit in the US. So these are our intentions. I'll just whiz through them, but you know, we're just trying to create effectively seamless end-to-end assurance for seafood, because that feels important to us, whether that's from wild or farmed, and it's got to be connected to good traceability to make sure that what you're assuring and what you're buying at any point in that chain is what you've paid for and what you're expecting. The business of standards and assurance is very complex, and it takes a lot of management and a lot of input. And I know some colleagues are on here from MSC, for example, and this was indeed why Seafish realized that they couldn't continue to maintain a standard with the rigor with which is required to deliver this into the marketplace. And standards don't solve the world's problems, but they're a really important tool in creating those changes that do.
Okay.
Am I out of time?
Well, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
I suppose we are really, Melanie.
This is an important one, Chris.
Please do.
So this is the important one that just shows you on aquaculture. You can see that if we do a very broad overview, there are a number of very good global rigorous standards that address the dominant risks and areas within the business of aquaculture. And when you move over to fisheries, you notice that there are some gaps in that space. And so those are the gaps that we seek to fill. And what I should add there is where there are already good and rigorous standards, for example, MSC sitting under environment and fishery, we have no need or intent to replicate that. We hope to partner with those MSC fisheries and with MSC as an organisation to help complete this process. So we can come back to that slide if you need to. And finally, a little bit about that seafood processing standards. I'll let you read through that because we're out of time, but it meets those kind of global benchmarks. It meets those global conventions. It allows for an enhancement and even greater requirement if that's wanted in regards to health and safety and social accountability. And whilst we haven't encouraged the use of logos and we don't charge for logos, I'm not going to deny that it's always a pleasure to see your logo used, and particularly alongside a long-standing logo such as the MSC there on this seafood. And this is actually on a pack going to China. So that was a really quick overview. And I know I believe someone we've got on the call as well is Mike Platt, who is our technical guru. So I think that we're well teed up to take any questions that people have across GAA, BAP, GSA, RFBS. Thank you.
Okay, Melanie, you're talking about global here, but to what extent are you actually global? I mean, many of these standards will be met, I hope, by European and American fishing fleets. But many of the real problems, of course, as we know, are in the Far East or Africa. Yes. But are you actually geared up to extending?
Absolutely. That was
promoting the standard in those areas.
Absolutely. That was a part of our commitment and using our kind of global expertise from aquaculture. So we have already got teams of people working in different areas around the world on aquaculture, for example. We know how to set up those global teams and how to deliver in a linguistic and culturally appropriate way in different places, and how to train auditors to deliver in different places. So we've taken all of that into account, building the vessel standard. There will always be challenges, and I mentioned that we completed in May, so only about 6 weeks ago. And now what we're doing is a suite of pilots in different global locations. We're testing the criteria and the auditability and the training of auditors in those spaces to ensure that this can be delivered on a global level.
But how much resistance do you get? I mean, for example, you talk about traceability and you talk about the difficulties of conditions aboard some of the boats. I mean, we know IUU fishing, possibly 20–30% of the world's fish being caught illegally, slave conditions, observers being killed. These are the people you want the people in order to get this scheme really effective, you've got to engage with people who are trying to avoid the rules.
Of course, but you have to start from where you can start, Chris. And just as you have seen other major standards develop, the first thing to do is to create consensus around what best practice is. And then you take that to the marketplace. And their first job is then to make sure that all of their supply chains do not have these atrocities within them. You then working with NGOs who are working in a slightly different kind of Venn diagram of that space, who are building, for example, on the fisheries side, fisheries improvement projects. And we're now starting to build into those social improvement projects. So you're building all the time this network, this model of change. No, you don't go from creating a standard to having that accepted in, you know, let's say the world's biggest challenges of fisheries and social situations on board fishing vessels. You have to build that by degrees. And the first degree is to build the consensus around this practice and get the market to expect that in all of their supply chains. And then in parallel, be working with NGOs, governments, and the European Commission in order to take that to the next level. You're chipping away at that all of the time.
Okay, thank you very much. Come back to you, Melanie. So let's go look at tuna, one of the world's most, well, Europe's anyway, and America's most popular fish. Julio, where are we? Oh yes, Dr. Julio Moron Eola. I probably pronounced that wrong, but the floor is yours. I think you're on mute.
Sorry. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for giving me the chance to share with you what is the standard that we are promoting. Basically, what we're doing is just a private-public certification scheme, basically for tuna fisheries and tropical tuna fisheries. And this is done by AENOR, that is the Spanish certification association. So this is the scheme that is basically talking about 5 pillars. This the first one was referring to maritime safety, that you take in consideration the IMO identification and reference number assigned to a vessel, to every vessel associated with a ship owner that is responsible for its operation. Second, you have the International Association of Classification Societies. So your vessel needs to be classified and restricted navigation notation, classification and hull, machinery, and quick freeze cargo. And third one is the insurance, the international group of P&I protection and indemnity societies. So there you have anchorage and mooring insurances, electricity, fire protection, gas deposit, propeller, subdivision, machinery installation, navigation pipes, etc. So a whole bunch of elements that are actually talking about the safety related to the vessel. Second, we try to get the less ecosystem impact in no fisheries with 100% observer coverage that provide the compliance from every vessel for the code of good practices that is verified by a third party. In this case, is Acti Technalia, either with human observers or electronic observers. We are having a lot of electronic observers on board, and we have developed that that mechanism in order to be a credible and very robust system to validate the code of good practices. Third one is the control on the fishing activity based on the European legislation, how the Spanish administration is doing that through the different elements that are related to VMS control, to catch documentation scheme, to fishing logbooks, etc. Fourth one is the best sanitary standards based on the European Union legislation about the sanitary conditions of the fish that you have on board. So all these elements, as you can see, are basically on legal requirements that are requested, and we put them all in a package. And the last one, and the most important one for us, is the best labor conditions based on the Ilo Convention 188. The International Labour Organization in 2007 established and approved, in fact, by 120 plus countries, the Convention 188, Working Fishing Convention, and this has been now ratified and entered into force by a number of countries. That is not still widely accepted, but is on track. So this is basically of 5 pillars, the most important part for talking about the responsible fisheries in tuna. And this is an international standard under which we have already 47 vessels certified, belonging to the flags of Spain, Ecuador, Belize, El Salvador, Guatemala, Panama, Curacao, etc. And this is actually the fundamental part of this standard is that it's absolutely open for any ship owner that is able to achieve this standard that we have, and then is certified by a third party that is INO in this. What are we looking for? Our commitment at the UN Ocean Conference in 2017 was to fully work in the 2 elements of the sustainability, socioeconomic and environmental, because we care about the people first, then we care about the planet to sustain the fisheries that we live upon, and then of course we talk about the profit, because this is something that is we are not an NGO. We are here to get the salaries and work for our people, and based on that. And this is basically the communication in progress, so as we belong to the Global Compact, UN Global Compact group. So here's our standard, and here's how are we promoting the sustainability in tuna fisheries particularly.
And again, the label, is that addressed to consumers, or is it intended primarily to satisfy retailers? And
yes, it is addressed for consumers. I had a longer presentation, but as Pedro told me that this is going to be an exchange, so I didn't want to introduce the chain of custody regulation that INO is certifying the canning factories that they're able to label the cans. And nowadays in Spain, there are over 9 million cans of tuna already certified with the INO standard, and in over 9,000 supermarkets around the country.
Let me play devil's advocate. I'm going to bring Camille Derrick in a moment from the Marine Stewardship Council. But if a fisherman is, for example, seeks MSC certification, goes through all that process of doing it, then the chances are, even though the MSC isn't looking at the same standards as you're measuring in all instances, the chances are that someone who really cares about sustainable fishing is also going to be looking after their crews, aren't they? I mean, you know, the rogues out there, the slave operators and the like, they're not fishing sustainably, and they're not looking after their people.
No, and that's the paradox is that a vessel certified with MSC has recently, and you know the case, one observer has been killed on board the vessel, and the vessel has been removed from the certification scheme. And just to let you know, we are also working as a group on MSC certification that will be published by late August. So we are working in both sides. So it's not one against the other. It's one complementing the other, because sustainability has been always linked to environmental sustainability alone. And now we have been demonstrating that environmentally sustainable fish doesn't mean that is social and environmental sustainable. So, and this is the concept that we want to promote. Once you talk about sustainability, you have to talk about the 3 elements that are included in this concept, because has been hijacked. The concept of sustainability has been, in a way, hijacked by the environmental side alone, forgetting about the social. And this is a part that needs to be completed in a way. And the objective for us is just to get both elements as robust as possible to guarantee the consumer that they have a sustainable fish with social conditions on board.
Well, I think that's timely, allows us to turn to Camille Derrick, because I think the Program Development Director for the Marine Stewardship Council, because Camille, I think the Julio's just highlighted the fact that the Marine Stewardship Council certification doesn't cover some important matters.
I'll speak to that in my introductory words about the MSc program. First of all, good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me on the panel. I don't have slides, but I thought it would be useful to talk you through the basics of the MSc program by means of a verbal update. So first, I'd like to speak about why we are here, and then look at how the system of the MSc functions and evolved over time, what the impacts have been, and where we go next. And that should take about 7-8 minutes. So
you can't, Camille, you don't have 7 or 8 minutes.
I do it quickly.
And I think actually, from our speakers here anyway, I think I've already acknowledged that within certain criteria, MSc certification is probably the, if not the gold standard, the silver standard, the best. But and we already know, you're covering about 14%, I think, of the world's fish now. But only 14% of the world's fish, you could say.
Correct. So, if you permit me a couple of minutes, then I'll talk through that and I'll cover that as well. And I will reflect on our global challenge, which MSc is one part of the solution for, but definitely not the only one. We work in partnership with many of the stakeholders and initiatives, and I just one tool in the toolbox. But let me zoom out to, say, 25 years ago, when the MSc was created, because that's when global overfishing really came top of the international community's agenda, and that led to the FAO creation of the Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries. That code was a voluntary global code. We heard about it on Monday from the UN, from the FAO, and it didn't really have teeth, if you like. It was voluntary. MSc was a standard that was modeled on the basis of the Code of Conduct, and essentially it was a tool to effectively, through certification, drive the uptake of the Code of Conduct. And MSc is, and still is today, a mission-driven organization where we act as a tool to recognize and reward sustainable fishing, ultimately to contribute to the health of the world's oceans for all that depend on it, and to reflect immediately on if that is an environmental standard alone, yes. But equally, if your fish stocks are in order, if your environmental impact is limited, your ecosystem impact is limited, and your management function, you will provide social benefit for all the dependent. So the environmental standards have a very strong link to socioeconomic impact that the MSc also aims to contribute to. The MSc idea is and remains very powerful. It is by rewarding and creating value for the best performing fisheries in the marketplace that we hope to inspire fisheries that are not yet at that performance level to embark on a pathway to improve and to also at some stage seek certification to confirm their sustainability and reap the benefits of their colleagues. That's the theory of change. That was it in the mid-90s, and it's not changed over the last 25 years. So does it work in practice? I'm quick to say it does, but there is a lot behind it. MSc is a standard setter. We set, in fact, 2 standards, and we operate an eco-labeling program. The standard for sustainable fishing is then linked by the standard for traceability for chain of custody to products that carry an eco-label and recognized by consumers in the marketplace. It's not a static program. The standards have evolved over time. This is to ensure that these standards remain aligned with what is considered global best practice and widely adopted science. As I mentioned, there's 3 sort of core pillars behind the MSc program where the stock sustainability is looked at. That targets effectively maximum sustainable yield levels, very much like in the common fisheries policy. The second pillar is about low environmental impact fishing, so bycatch and habitat impact, encounters of ETP species. And then last but not least, management systems evaluated. Is there sound decision making? Is that transparent? Is it responsive to serious issues in the water? Is there a proper monitor and compliance and surveillance system which demonstrates the work so there's no illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing, and so forth? As a standard setter, MSc doesn't certify anything. We set standards. Certification is done by impartial, trained, accredited assessors, and that's a robust public process. It's transparent for everyone to see in the website, fully based on best available evidence and science. There's a peer review and objections process, and as you said, Chris, it's widely regarded as a blueprint for credible assurance of sustainable seafood.
Camille, let me stop you there, and let me throw back the point that was made before. I mean, you don't cover some of the other eco labels here that have been discussed, especially looking at you know, the conditions on board vessels and the like. I mean, that doesn't get taken into account by the MSC, does it?
Yes, it actually is. It's not necessarily well known, but nowadays the MSC standards are very much recognized in labor conditions and seafood supply chains. So our chain of custody standard, in fact, has a risk-based filter. Companies operating in high-risk countries are expected to meet recognized third-party labor standards. When it comes to our fisheries requirements, we have criteria that all fisheries need to meet. They need to demonstrate what policies and practices they have in place to ensure there's no forced and child labor happening. And moreover, that's not the last of it. The MSC has publicly said we very much monitor this space, and initiatives like the Responsible Fishing Vessel Scheme initiative, now moved over to Global Seafood Assurances, we've actively supported it. And we may very well recognize it if it emerges as a credible tool to demonstrate that fisheries meet the ILO 188 Convention criteria. So the MSC is very much working in this space, collaborative action, and we very much look forward to a credible tool being recognized in the global seafood market, and the MSC can then recognize it as such.
Let me just throw this to all our panelists. How do we avoid a confusion? I mean, I think it's already been suggested. Was it Melanie? You said that your label complemented the MSC label. They could go together. Was that correct? Is that the case for other panelists too? Are these labels that can go together?
So you mentioned my name, so I'll jump in and answer that question, if I may, from my perspective. There are different stages all along the supply chain with their own risks and their own kind of unit within which you can develop a standard. MSC, for example, have spent the past 20 years developing a very credible and rigorous certification scheme around environmental management. To use your word complement, the next complement to that is to create a standard of equal rigor, whether that's Julio or ourselves or others. We're all working together on this around the vessels and the crew. So they're not confused and they're not competing. They're completely separate spaces that are inextricably interlinked, and we have to address all of those along the supply chain. So we talk to MSC all of the time. They know exactly what we're doing. We're working with them all the time. We'd be very happy to partner with them more formally. But you know, these things come over time. But until then, there's no competition, and we're not certifying environmental management of fisheries. So there shouldn't be confusion. I hope that's okay.
Julio, you said that you are working. Is it all your tuna vessels, or just some of them are working towards MSC certification?
We are all working for MSC certification. The same group that is certified with the APR INR is working for the MSC certification. What we try to do is just compiling the two elements, because in our preference would have been that public certification would have been available, especially at the EU level, that could have been developed. Something, when you say your common fisheries policy objective is to have sustainable fisheries, then you achieve it, that you can certify, and the consumers will not lose, will not be confused by all these different brandings.
Yeah.
That would be our preference. But as this is not the perfect world that we would like it, then we try to coordinate as much as possible, as Melanie said, in order to have a common ground in all the elements. So we recognize MSC as the environmental standard, very good. And now we're working in the social standard, where we have a reference that is already on the table, is the Ilo Convention 188. And any social standard that could be developed in fisheries has to take that in consideration, not only for us, but also for NGOs, for unions, and for governments, because at the end of the day, governments will have to ratify ILO 188 and will have to implement it, even with the port state measures. So you have cases where you find a vessel calling into your port, and you are able to implement the ILO Convention 188 and see what is happening on board that vessel. And this is a very, very powerful tool. And this is where we could give assurances to the consumers that they have a sustainable, whole sustainable concept, seafood in their plates.
And Monique, the French label, is this complementary to the MSC, or do the French fishermen seeking your label say, you know, that's it, that's enough, we won't look elsewhere?
En fait, je dirais c'est complémentaire. Disons que le spectre de l'écolabel, en tout cas l'ambition de l'écolabel est plus large que celui de MSC aujourd'hui. Et il y a beaucoup de critères qui se regroupent et qui se recroisent. Mais l'idée, c'est d'être complémentaire dans, je dirais, le fait d'avoir différentes étapes aussi pour les pêcheries. C'est-à-dire que pour nous, toutes les bases réglementaires sont la norme et ne font pas partie du cahier des charges parce qu'elles sont d'application de droit. C'est-à-dire que il faut que de toute façon que je dirais l'ensemble des pêcheries les appliquent. Il y a pas de certification, c'est la base réglementaire obligatoire. Donc c'est vraiment le niveau pour nous réglementaire, que ce soit au niveau sanitaire ou que ce soit au niveau de normes sociales et environnementales. Ce sont les normes sociales et environnementales, les normes d'hygiène du paquet réglementaire européen qui doivent s'appliquer. Donc là-dessus, on est dans l'écolabel, on est sur un niveau au-dessus de la réglementation, avec un certain nombre effectivement je dirais de critères qui sont certifiés et qui vont au-delà de la réglementation de façon, je dirais comme pour MSC, volontaire. L'ambition de l'écolabel, c'est d'être effectivement de couvrir l'ensemble des piliers de la durabilité. Donc à la fois environnementale et sur tous les aspects environnementaux, que ce soit la ressource, les milieux, que ce soit la question du changement climatique, que ce soit l'énergie, que ce soit les bateaux, que ce soit en termes de type de pêche, et puis les aspects sociaux, les aspects économiques, et donc je dirais que l'idée c'est d'avoir aussi un label très exigeant, un label public très exigeant, le plus exigeant possible. Et donc, on le fait évoluer. On a une obligation de révision tous les 3 ans du référentiel de l'écolabel public. L'idée étant que l'ensemble, je dirais, l'ensemble de la filière des opérateurs soit de plus sensibilisé à avoir des objectifs les plus ambitieux possibles, que ça soit via des certifications privées ou que ça soit via des certifications publiques. Hein, je pense qu'il y a une complémentarité dans la question d'essayer d'avoir une diffusion très large des critères, enfin de la prise en compte d'objectifs de durabilité par l'ensemble de la filière, et puis d'avoir aussi différents niveaux d'exigence qui permettent, je dirais, à chacun de pouvoir progresser aussi dans la durabilité. Je pense qu'il y a, voilà, c'est peut-être dans ce sens-là qu'il y a une vraie complémentarité dans les différents labels, même si c'est confusionnant pour les consommateurs.
Thank you. I do wonder whether we end up all different organisations, slightly different labels, but you're all engaging with the same people. And is there not a huge, great number of fishermen out there who are simply, not simply the IUU fishermen, but maybe Chinese and Asian companies that aren't engaging with any of these sort of standards? Is that a fair point? I mean, you're dealing with all, basically the people that want these standards are the good guys, are they not?
Well, actually, just to put it out there, that I did put up a picture of some packaging in China with the MSC logo and the seafood processing plant logo, Chinese market. So to your point, of course there are millions, masses of people and so forth that we all need to get to, whether that's in tuna, whether that's MSC, whether that's us with vessels. We aren't going to get to them all overnight, but we have to start from here with good and robust standards, with a collective intent, with consensus, with regulations, with compliance, with market demand, with raising awareness, with education, with all of those things. And that's what we're doing.
I think if I could kind of
Please,
follow with some thoughts as well, that where we talk about IUU, it's criminal behaviour. So that's a kind of, it's a separate issue in terms of how governments and enforcement agencies and stakeholder groups need to work together to address that problem and stop giving these criminals somewhere to hide in the kind of volume seafood supply chains, if you like. And then that's where the best practice standards come in, where it's a practical mechanism through which we can start to kind of separate the good guys from the middle ground and the bad guys, if you like. And there's a huge appetite for collaboration across standard holders to try and harmonise and demonstrate equivalence as far as possible, so that this landscape doesn't get more complicated than it needs to be. And I think the final point that I'd make is, certainly from a UK market perspective, we've always focused on trying to keep this complexity away from the consumer as far as possible. So yes, there's definitely a space for eco-labels, but certainly in our social responsibility space and looking after crew welfare on vessels, that's a given. The consumers expect that that's happening already, and so we don't need to complicate it with a consumer facing label, because consumers quite rightly trust the retailers, the brand owners and the food service providers that they are buying sustainably caught and responsibly harvested seafood already. So that's where the industry is almost kind of trying to catch up and keep that consumer facing landscape as uncluttered as possible.
Please, Julio, please. Okay, just quick points. Julio, first of all.
A quick point for us. Oh, Camille.
The theory of change, but engaging with the good guys. Because if you engage the good guys, then obviously everyone wants to create that value, find that value as well. And that's exactly why eco-labels and certificates and standards exist. There's a key thing here that we have perhaps not reflected on as much, or at least I haven't reflected on, which is the market demand for sustainable seafood. We've heard about it a lot last days. We experienced it in the massive uptake of MSC label products in Europe, and especially in France, we have seen an enormous growth. And I complement this by saying that in March of 2020, GlobeScan, a research agency we work with since the last 10 years, has done the largest global sustainable seafood research amongst consumers. About 22,000 consumers were polled, and we've seen that in France, now 50% of consumers recognize the label, which is up from 36% in 2018. Trust in the MSC eco-label has gone up from 67% to 75%. So even in France, where there are strong domestic initiatives, we see that the MSC label is gaining of awareness among consumers. Sort of thing, and that's market demand for sustainable seafood is great, but we've seen there are an enormous amount of have started to proliferate across the European market zone. Many of these claims are not backed up by the rigorous standards and the transparent stakeholder-driven systems and processes that we would like to see. Not rooted in science and impartiality, and as MSC, we can critical that claims that are delivered can be relied on and trusted by consumers.
Couldn't agree more, and that's really my final point. But Julio, you wanted to come in first.
No, it's just a matter from the industry side, from the fisher side. What we're talking, you talk about good guys. It's just a matter of survival, because the market is flooded with imports, it's flooded with cheap fish. And the only way that you can survive with the standards that are required at the EU level is to be recognized in a separate niche, market niche, in order to maintain your running cost, because you cannot compete with the bad guys. And the bad guys' engagement with the eco-labeling is in some ways is coming into our market with those certain claims of sustainability that are confronting and are competing in a let's say unequally with the EU product. And this is where we are trying to find the values of the EU production against the imports that are sustainably claiming.
Thank you. Well, okay, picking up the point that Camille just made, the Commission, the European Commission, wants to ensure, of course, that it's promoting environmental sustainability at sea. It wants to ensure that working conditions, especially for European citizens on board fishing vessels, are of a high standard. And it wants, perhaps above all, to ensure that consumers have clear information. So if I was still chair of the Fisheries Committee in the European Parliament and you were coming to see me, what would you be asking me to press the Commission to do? Should it be introducing an eco label of its own, which all singing, all dancing, covers everything, even covers Monique's small-scale fishermen and good local practices and the like? Or should it simply be trying to coordinate so there's less confusion about labels? Or should it simply be standing back and letting the market and yourselves take the lead? Who'd like to go first? What do you want from the Commission? Okay, Monique. Oh, I beg your pardon. I'm sorry. I beg your pardon. Melanie.
So I'll give you two quick ones because obviously I'd like to give you a lot more, but one of them would be to use our standards, and I'm talking about the people on here. We have quality benchmark standards. We are, as standard holders, who are not making money from standards. I want to make that clear as well. There's always this sort of thing that somebody's making a lot of money out of standards. They're not. But we jump through a lot of hoops to make sure that our standards are appropriate, quality, rigor, all those sort of things. So I think it would be great if we could work more closely with governments and regulators and the Commission on recognizing those standards as part of compliance, perhaps. And the second piece would be that you actually said, particularly for those working within the EU, I would push back to you that creating regulations for EU fisheries that have a different set of parameters than those producing seafood for import into Europe is inappropriate. So actually, if, for example, and I understand again, the ILO 188 is a requirement now of all, it hasn't been ratified, but it's a requirement of EU countries, then we should be also saying that imported seafood should also come from places where they're working to ILO 188 conventions. And to help support that, standards like Julio's and our own can be part of that compliance process. So use us, use the global conventions, make sure that seafood that's imported has the same requirements as that's produced within the EU. I've gone quiet.
Okay, Julio?
Yeah, the marketing standards are under discussion in the Commission, and they need to be very clear, because nowadays you take a kind of tuna and you don't know where the fish has been caught, who caught that fish. So the traceability from the European side, the marketing standards has to be clear, and the same as Melanie said, require the same standards to the EU production to the imports.
But should the Commission introduce an eco label of its own? Okay, Melanie's saying no.
Why would you do that when we've done all this work for you?
I had this debate 20 years ago, but and 20 years have passed and no eco label has been introduced. And then, of course, I seem to remember at the time making the point that be political here, that the EU's previous eco label attempts hadn't been hugely successful. So why would you supersede the work that's already been taking place? Julio, though, what's your response to that?
Yeah, I think we will be more comfortable with a public certification scheme, but to be
so you would like a European eco label?
Yes, because it would be very useful in the same way that it's done for the I don't know, the freezers with the system with A, B, C, D, different grading. Not saying this is good, this is bad. You just say, what are the different things that you have to achieve, and then give a grading standard, because people that is able to pay a bit more is very few. And the common people needs to to have cheap food in the markets, and they know they're going for something that is not that good as those that are ready to pay more. You have to confront the reality of the market.
Well, we haven't got time, but of course, if the Commission were to introduce an eco-label, we then have to discuss, just what elements it would take account of.
Camille's trying to get in as well, Chris.
Yeah, no, I'm not stopping anyone. Monique, any last comments? What should the Commission do?
Yeah, well, I think the Commission should introduce minimum requirements applicable to seafood claims operating in EU. And these requirements, they should cover the principles such as robust science, transparency, accountability, inclusive stakeholder participation, and rigorous independent verification. And it should be applied consistently to all stuff in the EU market, independent of its origin. 65% of seafood consumed in Europe is imported. We believe that the EU has an important role to play to ascertain that such requirements are met before claims would be allowed in the marketplace, and that the current legislation on voluntary sustainability information directed at consumers therefore has to be strengthened. There are minimum criteria, but we don't really see these being policed. So these claims include on-pack labels and certification schemes, but should also pertain to other forms of product information, including point-of-sale claims, purchasing guides, and other forms of consumer advice. So we don't want a European eco-label. We want strong minimum criteria that are policed. And we want the level playing field to be established both within and outside the EU. And I'm fast to say the common fisheries policy is a great tool, but it's not implemented on all fisheries in Europe properly. A lot of stocks remain overfished, remain in an overfished state, and therefore the common fisheries policy, unfortunately, is not fully applied. And this, it doesn't meet our definition of sustainability. If you're European, it's not necessarily MSC equivalent and sustainable.
Thanks, Camille. So no eco label, but ensuring that the consumers are not being given false information or better supervision of the information that is being put on cans. Okay, and Monique, do you have a last point? Monique's frozen. I think. Monique, do you have a last point you wish to make? What do you want the Commission? What would be your advice to the Commission?
Globalement, je rejoins quand même les positions, les avis sur la question de la protection et les questions d'équité de concurrence. Après, je pense que la Commission a déjà tracé un certain nombre de recommandations, de pistes. C'est vrai qu'on a encore énormément de travail à faire. Il y a une politique commune des pêches qui va être mise à jour prochainement. Je pense que voilà, il y a des prochaines échéances politiques qui sont intéressantes en tout cas pour nous et pour voir que quand même on a pu mettre en place un certain nombre de labels, d'écolabels, de marques, et je pense que globalement quand même il y a eu une forte progression sur la prise en compte de la durabilité au niveau des consommateurs. Donc je pense que on va avoir une politique des pêches qui va vraiment intégrer tous les éléments qui ont été présentés dans le Green Deal, d'ailleurs très récemment par la Commission. Donc je suis plutôt confiante sur le fait qu'il y ait tous ces éléments soient pris en compte au niveau européen, puis pris en compte par rapport à la place de l'Europe au niveau mondial également. Donc, voilà.
Thank you. Now I think Pedro has sent a note around saying there are various written questions. I haven't got access to these, so I don't know if anyone else watching this does, nor do I know, as we're supposed to finish at 12.
There are quite a lot in there, Chris, and I don't know, I've got a little Q&A button at the bottom, and I'm sitting here answering some of these questions, and some are directed to Camille and Julio and Helen, so I'm not sure why you can't see them.
I can't see a thing, no. Helen, just as we go this round, let me finish with you. what's your advice to the Commission? Do you want to see a European Union eco-label or not?
I would say definitely not, and to keep it short, would completely agree with Camille and Melanie's points. I think that it's important that we recognise the complexity of the landscape and all of the incredibly hard work that's been done by all key stakeholder groups over the past kind of 4, 5, 6 years from a social perspective, and obviously much longer from an MSC perspective. And it's important to complement and build on that rather than reinvent any wheels that have already been slogged over.
Okay, thank you. Well, Pedro, if he's there, I'm afraid I can't see any questions and I can't see a button for them, so I don't know.
So below where you have the option with the participants list and with the interpretation and the sharing screen, there should be a button with Q&A. So
I haven't. So you have to, if you wish us to do this, because I'm conscious of the timing, perhaps you could take a lead, Pedro.
Well, maybe it's easier if people reply by written. I don't know if everyone else can see the Q&A option, or basically there are several questions for Monique and for Helen and for Julio. So it would be easier if you could reply to this in writing so that we can move to the next section on animal welfare.
Yes, well, there's animal welfare. There's another eco-label requirement, of course.
It's already in our BAP standards. I just want to put that out there. But also, can I just ask Pedro? I can't capture these questions, and I'm kind of hoping that perhaps you can capture them and send them out to the panelists, and we can always respond privately to these folks that we haven't had a chance to respond to whilst we've been on air.
Mm-hmm. I can also, yes, I can do that as well. I can keep them and then send it to you if you want.
Oh, okay. So Pedro is urging us to come to an end so the next session can start. So nothing to say really, except thank you very much for that discussion. Personally, I think we could have gone on for a lot longer. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Chris.
So thank you very much for the debate. It was really, really, really interesting. And now we will move to the animal welfare. So I don't know who will begin. I suppose this is Doug Wally.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, there's two of us here to speak something about fish welfare, myself and Christoph's actually going to speak to you first, but to have our two presentations hopefully flow a little better, I'll just introduce myself and who I am quickly and then pass over to Christoph. So I'm Doug Whaley. I'm the Fish Welfare Programme Leader at Eurogroup for Animals. We are a Brussels-based umbrella organisation for 70 animal advocacy organisations, mostly around Europe, but also around the world. Our primary activities are political advocacy, and we also have a networking and coordination role amongst our member organisations. Several of our members have well-established animal welfare labels around Europe, none of them with fish criteria or fish labels at the moment. Myself, I'm a member of the EU platform on animal welfare fish subgroup. It's published fish welfare guidelines recently. I would encourage you all to look at that if you want to see what fish welfare criteria can look like, carefully defined. I'm also a member of the Global Aquaculture Alliance's Fish Welfare Technical Advisory Group. Melanie's mentioned that welfare is already in their standards, and they have a project underway developing training materials and further criteria for their standards. I'm also a member of the Aquaculture Stewardship Council's Technical Advisory Group that it also has a project underway to beef up the welfare aspects in their standards. So I'll come back and have something to say in a few minutes, but Christoph, please.
Thank you, Doug. I'll try to present my screen first and then I'll do the intro. Can you see my screen already?
Yes, we can see it. Can you do full? Yes.
Yeah, sure. Great. So hi, my name is Christoph Wojtas. I'm working for Compassion, which is an international organization working on farm animal welfare. And historically, for over 50 years, we've been working on land animals for the last probably altogether 10 years, but we have a quite advanced fish welfare project for the past 4 years. And we do a combination of public campaigns and quite advanced corporate engagement and political advocacy. So we also do sit in the Aquaculture Advisory Council and the EU Animal Welfare Platform, but do also work with retailers and the industry to quite some extent. Today I'll start our shared presentation with Dag with an intro on fish welfare and seafood certification, hopefully showing our stance why we think certifying for welfare is a good idea. And I'll start with some very basic stuff, and I guess the question we first need to answer, which is why would fish welfare matters? And I guess the very simple answer is because fish are sentient beings, and as we have the moral obligation to basically to take care of their welfare. Unfortunately, there is quite a large gap between common perception of fish intelligence and the scientific reality. Most people, I guess, don't really realize how complex fish are and how advanced science is there. And there is obviously a problem with empathy due to evolutionary distance. Fish are quite different to us. They live in a very different environment. And as it's fairly natural for us to empathize with a dog or even a cow or a pig because we have certain distinct features that we share. With fish, it's a bit more tricky, I guess, and this brings a barrier to general public to consider fish welfare. And I think those are the reason why fish welfare hasn't been discussed for quite long. But fish are sentient beings, and we know that there is very established science around that. We know that from experimental evidence of pain in fish. We know that from anatomical evidence of nociceptors in fish, neurotransmitters. Those are similar to other vertebrates, including humans. And we know from multiple research studies and observations, and there's a lot of peer-reviewed papers around those issues, that fish do experience fear, anxiety, depression, joy, and even pleasure. So considering that they do have the capacity to experience those, there is the moral obligation to address those issues, specifically when we farm fish. And interesting, I mean, just to show this table, it's adapted from a peer-reviewed paper from Walters. It's a table showing pain criteria for animals. And as you can see, fish are the only group of animals other than mammals that fulfill all the criteria for pain reception and experience of pain, conscious experience of pain. Obviously, this doesn't mean that birds or reptiles don't experience pain, but it's just interesting to show the amount of evidence we have. And I think any doubts in this field really comes from as I said, the lack of general sort of public perception of this rather than gaps in science. And there's an interesting quote from a quite renowned scientist, Victoria Braithwaite, that there's as much evidence that fish feel pain and suffer as there is for birds and mammals, and more than there is for human neonates and prenatal babies. So I think this is quite a powerful argument. What is also powerful when it comes to talking about fish welfare and sentience and our moral obligation is the numbers of fish involved. If we look at the numbers and stats, every year we kill around 74 billion land animals for human consumption. So this includes all cows and pigs and chickens and geese and so on. And at the same time, there are calculations which point out that we are possibly killing up to 3 trillion fish for human consumption. So as you can see, that this proportion is huge. And as we have, for example, in European legislation, quite clear directives and laws on the welfare of land animals, there is none for fish. So there is definitely a gap that needs to be addressed. So I think, I hope I did sort of made a good intro to the fact that fish, I believe, should be granted the same welfare of protection as land animals, and this is not currently the case. So with that intro, I guess the question would be, why should fish welfare be included in the certification schemes? You might be thinking about that. And the reason being is obviously because of the moral obligation that, you know, if we farm those fish, we should grant them a decent life. But also, as many of you stated today, certification schemes are at a certain forefront of the industry. They're showing the direction. They are instigating certain changes. And I believe there is a huge chance for this happening for fish welfare as well here. And also the number of animals that would be affected is huge. Like if we look at just the 5 largest global schemes, they cover 6% of farmed fish globally, and half of what we consume is farmed seafood. So that's a huge amount of fish. And then if we look at wild-caught fish, MSC alone certifies around 10%. So the numbers are big in terms of animals involved. But also, as we discussed, the certification schemes has the ability to, in a sense, educate the consumers as well, and to give them a way to go. And with fish welfare currently, the choice is quite limited, and it's difficult to point out where consumers should go if they want a better welfare fish. So I believe a proper addressing of fish welfare within the schemes would be a really good step forward. And how should fish welfare be included in the certification schemes? I believe there are 3 possible scenarios, and we can see some of them already happening to some extent. One of them is fish welfare could be included as an integral part of existing requirements. And to be fair, many of the schemes already have some welfare requirements. It's not that the issue is completely unaddressed. It is really good to see that some of the schemes do address welfare. But obviously, I do believe there is more that could be done. Some of those rules are more connected to health than welfare, and some of them are either optional or fairly vague. So I think there is still a room for progress. And I know at the moment, Friend of the Sea and ASC are already working on integrating fish welfare standards into as an integral part of their requirements. So that would be the first scenario you can see here. Another option is an add-on. I know in some schemes this was discussed as well. And it's an interesting concept where the scheme is focused mostly on sustainability, but then there is a welfare module that could be sort of added to the existing certification, where a consumer can see that the product is sustainably sourced, but also then it has a sort of a better welfare included. And the third scenario, which also happens in Europe, is a separate certification scheme. And this is something that is, I guess, more known for land animals. We have, for example, Beter-Leven in Netherlands, where it's a purely welfare-oriented schemes for farmed animals. But also, and I believe Dak will talk about that in a bit more in a minute, RSPCA, which is a farm animal welfare label, welfare specific, is certifying 2 species of fish as well, and they are focusing on that. There are obviously advantages and disadvantages of all those scenarios. If a scheme is welfare oriented, it could be more robust when it comes to welfare, but then sometimes there are certain interconnections which are a bit more difficult to address, and sometimes welfare and sustainability, you know, either come together or sometimes can slightly conflict each other. So yeah, that's an intro, and I'm passing to Doug now.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen as quickly and smoothly as possible. Is that looking good for you? Okay, no complaints. I'll carry on.
Now it's showing. Yes, perfect.
Okay,
Thank
good.
you.
So I've just two things I'll make some comments on. Yeah, as Christoph mentioned, I will share some experience, give a little overview, some insights into the RSPCA fish welfare certification scheme that has been in place, active in the UK for coming up for 20 years. I'm not sure exactly. And then I'll also make a few comments on some of the choices, some of the challenges faced when defining fish welfare criteria, and in doing that, having a look at some examples of what different types of indicators look like or can look like in a fish welfare context. Yeah, the RSPCA here, just a bit of small print. I'm presenting, RSPCA is one of our member organisations, but I'm presenting today my own sort of observations and insights. I'm not here with their own version of events necessarily. RSPCA, when it was founded in 1824 and was then the first animal welfare charity to be founded in the world, and today its brand is recognised by 96% of the population in the UK, the most recognised charity brand in the UK. And alongside that brand recognition, they've had a farm animal welfare labelling scheme in place for several decades. And around 20 years ago, they were approached by a salmon farmer in the UK and who said, please, can you develop a salmon welfare standard? This is the kind of thing we would find useful and we would like to do. And it's, as I say, it's been in place for almost 20 years, for at least the last decade, probably longer. It's been certifying between 60 and 80% of UK salmon production. Its trout standards were introduced more recently, and they are now certifying around 80% of UK trout production with this welfare-specific standard. And they have had the approach of approaching every issue with the question, what does this mean for the fish? And they've had the intention to become a valuable and a technical partner for those producers who are implementing high standards. And that's been a process of defining and understanding what fish welfare is and producing standards that are functional and useful and valued by farmers. And with the regular revision of the standards, that's really the position they've come to today. And this is rather an oversimplification, but their scheme covers farm management, including training and record keeping, health, medical treatments and mutilations, husbandry practices, handling, crowding, grading, equipment design and installation, feeding methods, feed withdrawal regimes, environmental quality, water quality, lighting, hours of lighting, intensity of lighting, environmental impacts, including escapees and fallowing periods. There are some system-specific husbandry practices, and there are guidelines for effective stunning and minimizing handling at the time of killing. And the model they've had of being a close collaborator with producers is seen in the standards. You can see it in the format of the criteria and in the content of the criteria. For example, where there's knowledge gaps in the literature, you see that they have maximum stocking densities that have been evolved with the experience of the farmers and what they find beneficial rather than drawing from validated or peer-reviewed literature. You can see they have a maximum time out of water of 15 seconds, and that's something developed in consensus with the farmers. It would be completely inappropriate in a colder country where a fish could die if you took it out of water for 15 seconds. And it's been a feature that what the farmers really want out of the guidelines is very clear criteria, very specific criteria that are well defined, and they want input criteria because that for them is a practical tool that they can use on the farm, and it's very clear. So I will say a few words. I'm going to use two categorizations of indicators. It looks like I've produced the slides in a few different technologies, and I can't see the headline on the slide here. So these are sometimes called environment, sometimes called indirect, sometimes called input indicators, and they basically measure the resources needed to achieve good welfare. In a welfare context, that can be water quality parameters, feeding regimes, handling parameters. The pros of these types of indicators is they can be clearly defined. You know, you can put numbers on water quality parameters, you can describe best practice in a handling procedure, and they function as practical instructions to operators. They know what to do to meet this criteria. It's very clear. Cons, downsides of the environment indicator input approach is they're only an indirect measure of the welfare of the animal, making some assumptions. It can be difficult to define thresholds that are correct across the wide range of farming and environmental systems that are out there, so it's not necessarily straightforward. Last slide, last comments. Animal-based direct or outcome indicators, they're sometimes called. You're actually measuring that good welfare has been achieved. So you might be looking for injuries or the absence of injuries, of course. You could be looking at swimming behavior. You can be looking at feeding patterns. And the upsides, the pros of these kinds of indicators is they are a direct measure of welfare. You really know that you've achieved something. And because they're animal-based, they are the same indicator is applicable across the wide range of systems, so you don't run into the same technical issues of defining different parameters for different systems. Downsides of animal-based and direct and outcome indicators, they can be difficult to define. If you compare to a comparable environmental indicator, when it comes to welfare, there's often a lower evidence base, and there can be less consensus in society around what standard is acceptable. So if you know where sustainability standards may control water quality by requiring meeting some third-party or governmental standards that already exist, that have had a process of putting evidence together and developing a consensus from society about what you can measure that is environmental impact. Welfare is not quite at the same position. And the real problem with these indicators is it's difficult to trace back to the cause. So it may not be a practical tool for the fish farmer. If you see an unusual swimming behavior, what has caused that? You've opened a very long list of things that might have caused that, and you have a very good measure of welfare, but you don't necessarily have the farmer has a problem. I can't meet this criteria. You're left in the position where you can't go back to the farmer and say what you have to fix is ABC, because you don't have a clear line from any one cause through to these outcome indicators. And with that time, I'm stopping quickly. Maybe we have a minute and a half of questions.
Thank you very much. I can't see any question right now, but I have one question for Doug. With the exception of RSPCA, is there really no other ecolabel that take into account the animal welfare?
Animal welfare specific is only the RSPCA and newly the RSPCA in Australia. But then, as we've touched on, some of the ASC, the Global Aquaculture Alliance, Global GAP, they have some existing aspects of welfare in their schemes. Sometimes it's highlighted as welfare, sometimes it's not. The organic regulations also have quite a focus on welfare within the European regulation that flows on into private standards, but there are certainly significant welfare aspects in there. Slaughter, some priorities for breeding and feeding regimes, housing conditions. So there are certainly aspects out there.
Okay, thank you. So one question from Sofia Strandberg. Doug, can you comment on the costs that comes with the competence required to assess animal-based measurements?
I will comment that you could never undervalue the training that will people to understand and interpret the animals they're keeping and looking after. I don't have figures in mind for monitoring specific animal-based measures. They should be some of the simplest and cheapest to observe if you're working with behavioral indicators, and there's work to do in validating those in the laboratory to really understand what they mean. But in terms of a farmer or an auditor using animal-based measures, they should be the cheap and simple ones.
Okay, another question for Christoph. Thank you for your presentation. Of the three options presented, standalone, integrated, or add-on, what would have your preference?
Thanks. Well, I think it's a complex issue. There are pros and cons of each of those. Personally, I guess my preference would be to fully integrate it into the existing standards, at least with the big labels. I think that they have already built their brands. I'm talking about ones like, you know, MSC, ASC, BAP, Friend of the Sea. You know, they are recognized, and that's not easy. So they already have recognition, and I guess sometimes it is to some extent interrelated, where welfare comes sort of hand in hand with being more sustainable. So it could probably sort of overlap on those. And interestingly, I mean, we have representatives of some of those, but I can speak for them. Some of them are already doing that. So I know ASC, BAP, and Friend of the Sea are actually having welfare programs running. It will probably take some time to fully integrate those, and we'll see how good will those be, and how deep they're going to dive into sort of providing and you know, a proper welfare and being very detailed. But they are running welfare programs and are investigating how those could be integrated. I'm not sure how the add-on could work, but the separate welfare specific label, I think, has the advantage of being very robust on welfare, but has the disadvantages of first getting enough recognition, and second, there could be some, you know, consumer could be basically a bit in a challenging position if they have a product which has one or the other, or, you know, what would you choose? Do you want to be sustainably sound, or do you want to take care of the welfare of the fish? So yeah, I guess integration would be my answer, short answer. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. A new question for Doug from Christine Apsil. What's your experience at the global scale? In Europe, fish welfare is regarded important, at least with NGOs, but it doesn't seem to resonate elsewhere, not even in the US.
Somebody, I think, has been trying to help us finish on time and remove the question, but I just was bringing it back and typing an answer. But I a few years ago, I workshopped fish welfare. If I was videos with our SPCA farmers, why have you adopted welfare standards? How's that helped? And I workshopped that with fish farmers in China and Thailand and Vietnam. And in that context, where there'd been a day of stakeholder discussion to come up with a definition of ethical and welfare in the local language to get these concepts across, that wasn't easy. But so then when we had to describe what welfare was, there was huge overlap with what husbandry is, and then, you know, the related benefits for the farmer were well understood, and, you know, the farmers were telling me, I mean, if I don't have happy fish, I have dead fish, and I understand that. But of course, there were limits on the concept. They didn't have the same ethical expectations that we would find in European consumers, and they were very clear on the importance of the welfare for the farmer and having money to send their children to school before they're being extremely nice to their fish much, but certainly that's my experience at global level anyway. The US itself, I don't have so much direct experience.
So thank you very much. I think it's time to conclude. So I will come to my final speech. So this workshop tried to cover most of the aspects related to the voluntary claims, certification schemes, and sustainability labels for the seafood products. I think the thematic of voluntary claims and certification schemes is not a new one for the MAC. Indeed, the first discussion among the MAC memberships took place back in 2018, based on documents and studies provided by the European Commission. And the MAC came to the conclusion that it was important to hold a workshop to provide an adequate, expert and balanced input to analyze the status quo of how voluntary sustainability claims and certification schemes are situated in the European market. What is the role in relation to the supply chain and the consumers? In other words, what are their function and their real impact on the market? So the MAC Secretariat will prepare a report detailing the workshop discussions. This will serve as a basis for an advice to the European Commission with follow-ups and recommendations on the potential need to update the current legislative framework on voluntary sustainability claims on seafood products. The MAC should adopt this advice in the year 2021. So once again, I would like to thank, on behalf of the MAC, the European Commission for allowing us to hold this workshop despite the first reluctance. We also want to thank all the panelists for their very useful and professional presentation, as well as all the participants for their presence and their attentive listening. Finally, we thank Pedro, our General Secretary, for the flawless organization of this workshop in this difficult condition imposed by the COVID-19 pandemic. We also thank the team of interpreters for their excellent work. Their role is always essential to the good conduct of the debates. And I hope I haven't forgotten anyone, and I wish you a good day as well as a good summer break. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.